Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we have a very bold and eloquent journalist with us. He's a columnist for The Spectator and The Diplomat, the digital editor of MIT Technology Review in Pakistan, and he also writes hard hitting satire for The Dependent. Mr. Kunwar Khuldune Shahid, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me over, Hamza.
So, Mr. Shahid, could you take us to the beginning of your journey as a journalist? How did you become a journalist?
Okay, first of all, I'm not particularly good at talking about my own self because I never know what is important to say and what one should miss out. But I'll try my best. There's one thing that I always say: I'm an accidental journalist because I moved from being a failed engineer to being a failed CSS aspirant. I wanted to be a diplomat. Thankfully, that didn't happen because, as a diplomat, at the very least, if nothing else, you have to be diplomatic. I don't know if I could have done that. So yeah, I was always fond of writing. Even while I was studying, while I was in the University of Engineering and Technology Law, I was writing for publications like The Nation in Pakistan Today. But those were just sports pieces, music reviews, movie reviews, book reviews. Nothing that could count as journalism. Just that I had certain opinions that I wanted to share. Then I think it was 2011, October, I joined Profit, which is now a fortnightly business magazine affiliated with Pakistan Today. Back then it was an eight pager. It was a daily 8-pager. Again, I did not have any background in economics either, but that's how it started. And since then I've been affiliated with The Nation, Pride Times, Dunia TV. I've written for Daily Times, The News, Dawn's magazines as well. So I've had my experience with Pakistani media.
And now you work for a lot of international publications and you have experience in a wide range of newsrooms. So how do you compare Pakistani media outlets and international media outlets which are reporting in Pakistan?
I think it's a completely different experience, but honestly, I would prefer working for and writing for Pakistani publications and Pakistani media outlets because, we are Pakistani journalists. So, I mean, if you cover a story for international publication, of course, it has its legs. It reaches certain places, but none of those places is actually relevant. You want to be published in Pakistan because I mean, if you're talking about issues central to Pakistan, if that is what you want to do, then your focus should be on, getting published in Pakistani newspapers. But over the past couple of years, I haven't been able to do that because the ideas that you want to share, the base you want to stir up, it's no longer possible here. It used to be a few years ago. The things we published 4 or 5 years ago, it's unthinkable today. Today you can't do that. So of course, I'm grateful that other international media outlets give me the opportunity to express my views, but I'd rather write for Pakistani publications.
You've seen the downward spiral in terms of censorship in Pakistan and restriction of the media. So could you tell us about what topics are considered taboo in Pakistan or which are difficult to report in Pakistani media?
If we started just listing those topics, I think we'll run out of time today. I mean, all countries have their holy cows. Most countries would have a holy cow, or maybe a couple. In Pakistan, we have a whole herd of cows, a herd of holy cows. You can't. There are just so many cows that you have to deal with in Pakistan. Starting with the military, religion. I'm not even going to talk about forget religion, forget Islam itself. Islamic extremism, Islamist terrorism. Similarly, even our foreign policy. I mean, just look at the way Pakistani-Saudi relations today, as we speak, are imploding in front of us. And do you see that debate on the national TV? Do you see that debate? So you can't even talk about that. Balochistan. Balochistan is one subject that you can't touch. I mean, you can even talk about the blasphemy law, maybe not today, but a few years ago. But even when we had the most freedom a few years ago, which I personally felt.
I can hear you fine.
I'm sorry. So you could, there was a time you could talk about even the military establishment, but Balochistan was a no-go, has been a no-go for journalists, for media, and so many. I mean, if you talk about Balochistan, for example, you can't even ask simple. Forget about militancy, forget about the separatist movement or the nationalist movement. In Balochistan, you can't even question the simple fact that Sui, the town that has been providing gas to Pakistan for the past 6-7 decades, why does the city of Sui not have any gas for itself? I mean, that should be the fundamental question that you should be asking. You can't even talk about that. You know, the only discussion about Baloch rights is to blame the politicians, is to blame the Baloch nationalist leaders. Of course, everyone has their share in the blame. There's no question about that. But why can't we have open debates? You know, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, for example. You can't talk about the PTM. There is blank PTM. And you know, again, there are so many topics. For example, Kashmir. Now, when you talk about Kashmir from the Pakistani perspective, the obvious assumption is you want to talk about the Indian abuses in Kashmir. You want to talk about the Hindutva politics. You want to talk about, you know, the BJP government scrapping Article 370, 35A. You want to talk about those things. But what about what Pakistan has done in Kashmir? You know, what about the fact that, you know, what is Pakistan's contribution in actually aggravating the Kashmir crisis? You know, why don't we ask why Azad Kashmir, which is Azad just on the political map that we release, you know, on and off. Why does the constitution of Azad Kashmir say no opinion that is contrary, I'm paraphrasing, no opinion that is contrary to the accession of Kashmir to Pakistan will be allowed? So in Azad Kashmir, you're not Azad enough to talk about Kashmiri independence. The only option you have is to talk about Kashmir banega Pakistan. You can't say Kashmir banega khud mukhtar, which is what the fight should be if you're talking about Kashmiri independence. So even those, you know, even those issues, I mentioned Kashmir because these are supposed to be our issues, that the issues we are, you know, taking up internationally. Even on these issues, we can't have open debates. You know, we should, for example, maybe certain perspective, maybe criticism of the Pakistani state policies are wrong in certain areas. But how can you disallow debate altogether? Tell people why they are wrong. Tell people why their opinion on Balochistan is wrong. Why their opinion on, you know, Pakistani state policies is wrong. Why can't we have these debates? Again, we'll run out of things that, you know, that are censored in Pakistan. That's how it is.
Mr. Shahid, many people who belong to the national security establishment argue that Pakistan is a national security state, and many of its priorities are very sensitive, like the insurgency in Balochistan and in Kashmir and its relationships with India. And they think that if they allow open debate, our long-term security goals will be compromised or may be compromised. So what do you think about this argument?
I think this is a classic case of, you know, certain totalitarian states, or, you know, states who are, you know, having the tendency of becoming totalitarian. These are the excuses that they use to, you know, censor free speech. This is, I think, the worst culprits in terms of clamp down on free speech in Pakistan. You know, we journalists, we claim to be victims of it. We are the biggest culprits ourselves because we don't know what freedom of speech means. It is true, there are certain issues, you know, pertaining to national security that no country in the world would allow to be debated on TV. That is why you have classified documents. You can't classify an entire debate. You need to have a debate. You need to discuss if it's sensitive, if you know, Balochistan is sensitive, if Kashmir is sensitive. You need to have a discussion. And first of all, you need to have a discussion why Pakistan is a security state to begin with. You know, we don't even have the debates regarding the creation of the country itself. I'm not one for, you know, rummaging, you know, around over 70 years ago to find, you know, the roots of the problems that we find today. You know, what happened 70 years ago is largely irrelevant today because we now have the benefit of hindsight. But we need to ask ourselves why certain ideas that were perpetuated in the 1940s are still etched in our curricula and our narrative. Why did Pakistan become a security state? Why did military dominate in Pakistan, but not in India? What happened? We should ask ourselves. For example, I don't want this to become a, you know, history lesson for all of us. All I'm saying is you need to ask, you know, whether or not the Pakistan movement itself was democratic. You know, Pakistan was based on the, you know, contrary to the principle of one man, one vote. That is how Pakistan was created, because you wanted 1/3 representation for the Muslims in the provincial legislatures. Similarly, when Pakistan was created, for the first 24 years, we negated the principle of one man as in one person, not one man, because that's how it's one person, one vote, till 1971, because we did not want a Bengali majority to rule over us. That is the foundation of Pakistan becoming a security state. That is the foundation of Pakistan not adhering to democratic principles. Again, maybe by interpretation, or anyone who has this interpretation, maybe we are completely ignorant. Maybe we have a completely wrong observation or interpretation of history. But why can't we discuss these things? That is my only question. We need to discuss these things.
No, you're absolutely right, and there is a debate missing on very important topics. But you said that we as journalists are the biggest culprits in this. So you have experience in different newsrooms, and you've seen how different media outlets self-censor, and they even without directions, they consider themselves on what to censor. So tell us about your experience in censorship, especially in regards to Khabristan Times, which was a satire outlet which was extremely popular in Pakistan, and that it was put down by the Pakistani state. So please share your experiences regarding censorship.
I think I'll discuss those two issues separately. First, the mainstream media and my experience in mainstream media. I think it might sound harsh, maybe even unprofessional, but Pakistani media houses are, unfortunately, they are PR agencies today. They are doing PR for the powers that be. They're doing PR for the ISPR. What the ISPR has done, it has outsourced its narrative to the media houses. And I don't say this as an outsider. You know, when I say journalists are a part of, we are a part of the problem. I have been a part of the problem. I've been a part of newsrooms where you're receiving instructions on what you can say and you can't say, and you don't question that. You don't question that because that's just how it is. You know, the greatest tragedy of Pakistani journalism is not that the actual issues that need to be discussed aren't being discussed. That's not the greatest tragedy. The greatest tragedy is that it is considered too unrealistic to have those debates. You can't even entertain the possibility. I've been guilty of this myself as well. You know, I've been satisfying myself with the fact, oh, I write for certain international publication. My views are out there. That's what I believe in. But at the same time, I'm working for certain media houses and helping them censor what needs to be said. And I would go as far as say, I know I'm talking about my own colleagues, and I know things are tough, but anyone who's in an important position in media today, I'm not talking about the lower level staff, I'm not talking about sub-editors, the copywriters, I'm not talking about that. Anyone who's in a decision-making position in the Pakistani media today is at the very least compromising the very essence of what journalism is all about. So I just to, in certain countries, you talk about there being, you say that they are just doing PR, or they're a part of, journalists are a part of common WhatsApp group. In certain countries, you say that for satirical or ironic effect, because it's an exaggeration. In Pakistan, it's a fact. It's a fact. When you say WhatsApp journalism, Pakistan is exactly practicing that. Think of any important story. For example, when Ahsanullah, all of a sudden was, vanished from the military's custody. Nobody was asking any, I think for a few days, there were no questions.
Tell our viewers who Ahsanullah Ahsan is?
Sorry?
Could you tell our viewers who Ahsanullah Ahsan is?
Ahsanullah Ahsan is the former spokesperson of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, who was in captivity, the military's captivity, and who mysteriously disappeared without any word from, at least from the state, because Ahsanullah Ahsan has had a lot to say. I personally interviewed him as well, but there hasn't been any official word from the military. But if you talk about the media right now, what the media did was there was no discussion on his disappearance for the longest time. And then everyone ran the same ticker, virtually the same ticker. Everyone had the same statement because that statement had the same source. It had the same writer. And there's nobody, today, Ahsanullah Ahsan is giving interviews to people like me. Why aren't senior journalists, why are our more celebrated journalists, why aren't they taking up the issue? Why, similarly, what about the whole hoopla over the construction of the Hindu temple in Islamabad? Why isn't that a big enough issue? Why aren't we taking up that issue? For example, I know if I get carried away and head in a different direction, just stop it right there.
I think your views are very important.
But for example, I saw, I think it was a few weeks ago, a TV channel covered the story of a Hindu family. It was supposed to be a feel-good story about a Hindu family that converted to Islam without any pressure, completely willfully. And that was the narrative of the whole story. It was supposed to paint Islam in a positive light, and that people are, or non-Muslims are, voluntarily, embracing Islam. Now, as journalists, shouldn't we ask the simple question that can freedom to convert be a reality in Pakistan, in a country where you don't have the freedom to convert from Islam to any other religion, where you have a blasphemy law that establishes the capital punishment for criticism on Islam? Can you really have freedom of religion? So why aren't these questions ever taken up anywhere? Why isn't forced conversion? There are, according to the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, there are over 1,000 forced conversions every year. That's like roughly 3 forced conversions every day.
And these are the ones which are reported. Imagine
these are the ones which are reported. Exactly. Why isn't our media taking up any of this? So the censorship you talk about in media houses is basically because the ISPR, the military. Again, it's not just the censorship that comes from the military establishment. The current government, the PTI government, has even cartoonists have been sacked for criticizing Imran Khan. People doing satire have had to leave the country because of their satire on Imran Khan. Certain journalists have been targeted because they have been, actively critical of the PTI. So it's a whole new level of censorship today in the media.
Pakistan Times, it got shut down, and it was such a inspiring platform with such beautiful satire coming out. So what happened with that?
Honestly, we don't know. Again, I think Khabristan Times was fortunate enough to have come out at a time where you probably had the most freedom in terms of Pakistani journalism. Between 2014 or 2012-13 to 2016-17, I think things changed when PICA, Pakistan Electronic Crimes Act, or also known as the Cyber Crimes Law, that was passed in August 2016. I think things changed after that. There was a 6-month span between August 2016 to January 2017, where there was complete an assault on online portals. And in January 2017, if you remember, secular bloggers were abducted and tortured, and they had to flee the country. So after that, if you remember, there was a complete exodus of anonymous profiles from social media. People who were criticizing the army, who were even criticizing religion. All these accounts simply vanished because of that crackdown. So I think Khabristan Times, because it was critical of again all the holy cows we just mentioned, the aim was to target. Given any notice by the PTA, and it was blocked in again January 2017. We created, again, it was a different team. Pakistan Times was a different team. Then a different team created the Diplomat, which is affiliated with Pakistan today. Yeah, so that's what happened.
So you're doing some really good work at the Dependent, but do you enjoy the same editorial freedom as you did with Khabristan Times?
Unfortunately, no. But at the same time, if you might notice, I think the things that the Dependent has been covering, or the points that it has been making or has been trying to make, it's still, I think, if I may say so, it's still, basically we're trying to say things that still no one else is saying. It's not as free, but that's true for all journalism. There was a lot of freedom again in the 2013 to 2017 window. If you notice, there was a whole new impetus for digital journalism as well. So the state actually did not know what to do with social media or websites. So that is how we enjoyed a lot of freedom back then. But after PICA, there has been a whole new level of clampdown. But yes, things have become increasingly restrictive everywhere, including for the Dependent. But obviously, trying our best. And I think Pakistan today deserves a lot of credit for that as well, because they are still managing to do that compared to what is happening elsewhere. So
yes, you're right. And there's a financial aspect in all of this as well, I think. So previously, we saw journalists making a reasonable living out of their work. But as the media landscape in Pakistan began to be restricted, we saw progressive journalists being fired from jobs. and salaries getting reduced to a great extent. So, in today's day and age, in 2020, what do you think about journalism as a profession?
I think journalism as a profession, unfortunately, um, for all of us, especially those of us who've entered the field over the last decade or so, I think it's okay, some of us have been privileged enough to have other opportunities and other income sources. You know, for example, for the longest time had multiple jobs. The other jobs weren't related to journalism. That's where you made your money. But of course, every journalist in Pakistan should be a full-time professional. Should not have to do anything else. So financial crisis is a grave reality. And here I would again. The state's policies are there, of course they are there, but I think the biggest culprits here are the media houses. There are two reasons why we have a financial crisis there. And the first reason is that media houses didn't adopt to new realities. Our media houses were completely dependent on government advertisements. Now, why was that? Why is your business model completely dependent on money that the government is going to give you? Because the government is going to give you money, and then you're going to, of course, when you get money from anyone, whether that's the government, you're supposed to peddle certain narratives. That was more or less the business. You know, all the mainstream media houses, all of them are run by business magnates themselves. So it's not the main source of money for them anyways. It's basically the source of their clout and influence over the people. The first reason is that your business model was wrong, which I think it's a global crisis. You know, the fact that it's a global media crisis that you couldn't cope with new reality. And the second was, of course, you were too dependent on government advertisements. Your business models financially didn't work, and most of them were too late in embracing the digital realities. They didn't know what to do with it. And I think that's where a lot of the media houses suffered financially. And of course, when any organization suffers, especially with the superstructure that our media houses have, it is impacted from the bottom up. So for the first to suffer are the ones that shouldn't suffer at all, and the last to suffer are the people who should be the ones bearing most of the brunt. So that's what happened, and of course that is a huge predicament, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed, of course.
But do you think this financial crisis will ease the transition towards the digitization of media?
That is what is happening, but there are two concerns personally that I have with that. First of all, yes, you need more digitization. Over the past few years, there have been certain news websites that have popped up. But the problem with Pakistani media is, again, going back to censorship, because again, we can talk about the business models and we can talk about the different technology that you want to use. But if you talk about censorship, I think the biggest problem with Pakistan is that we don't have an alternative media. We have alternative media websites, but they aren't doing alternative journalism. They're doing safe journalism. Again, it might sound harsh, and of course, everyone. But that's what I said. Everything is unrealistic in Pakistan. By the very definition of alternative media websites, you have to be alternative. You have to present viewpoints that the mainstream media isn't covering. So if you're going to be a digital website that is covering what the mainstream media is covering anyway, you're not going to attract an audience that wants to read or listen to different stories. So that is something we need to work on. We need genuine alternative media. For example, I was fortunate enough to meet a few Egyptian journalists last year. And in the case of Mada Masr, that's a prominent alternative news website in Egypt. Now, they were mainstream journalists formed that website because they wanted an alternative narrative. They've been censored, they've been jailed. What they're doing is that if they're banned, if their website is blocked, they use the VPNs. Their main purpose is to put forth a certain narrative. Their main purpose is not self-sustenance. So that is what Pakistan needs. A genuine alternative outlet is criminally missing over there.
But do you think it's possible with the fact that, even media bosses like Mir Shakil Rahman, who's the editor-in-chief of Jung and Geo Group, and he's very wealthy and considered to be a very powerful man, he's in prison since over 150 days now. Many other journalists have been harassed, intimidated, even killed. So, in these circumstances, do you think this is a reasonable expectation from journalists that they will risk their lives to report?
That's a fair question, but then I would like to ask a counter question as well. Since 2012, from 2012 to 2019, 33 journalists, Pakistani journalists, were killed. From 1992 to 2019, 61 Pakistani journalists were killed. How many of them can you name? I can't name more than 10, 15 myself. So we all know about Mir Shakil Rahman, and of course journalists are talking about what is happening, and we're talking about censorship. But we journalists do not even cover stories about our own fraternity. So, journalists that are killed, I mean, there is censorship about that coverage as well. Who killed certain journalists? What happened to Salim Shahzad? Why did it happen? You want to read the Guardian or the New York Times and other news outlets to see what happened. So again, okay, maybe you're right. It's not realistic for a young group of aspiring journalists to come out all of a sudden and create an alternative news website that challenges this. It's not realistic, true. But what about the big media names today? Our biggest media names are literally begging the ISPR for permission to air certain stories. This is not something made up. For example, last year, it's not conjecture that the military is censoring or dictating what is to be aired. In April 2019, in a press conference that the former DG ISPR, Asif Ghafoor, was chairing, Mr. Hamid Mir asked him, why don't you give us permission to cover PTM? And what does that? This press conference went on national TV. So Pakistan's top journalist, no one bigger than Hamid Mir, was sitting in a national security press conference, literally asking for permission to cover, and was denied. That's the best part. They don't. You talk about it being risky. If you talk about the military controlling everything, they love it when you publish these articles. They're not even pretending otherwise. They're not pretending. It's some certain politicians and certain publications that want to cover it up. They're out there. It was he again, as you mentioned, he denied that permission on national TV. Again, for example, there are so many examples. And again, I don't, you could accuse me of, I don't know, being disrespectful to my seniors, but this is what is happening. Kamran Khan, for example, I don't know if you saw his tweet a couple of days ago. His software, as they say, his software has definitely been updated. He tweeted, and I'm not kidding, I'm sure you must have seen the tweet. He tweeted that after Allah and Qaeda-e-Azam, if Pakistan owes anything to anyone, it's the Chinese president Xi Jinping. That is the new reality. We should all read the literature of Ma Jian, he was a prominent Chinese author. He wrote about the Chinese dream of Xi Jinping. The Chinese dream is soon going to become the Pakistan dream. You have the two-nation theory and the Pakistani ideology. In a few years from now, the Chinese dream would become the Pakistani dream, and that is happening. Our topmost journalists, how can you say something like that on Twitter, and how come there is no repercussion for this? So again, when I say there needs to be, again, there are certain senior journalists who have protested. A lot of them, again, have been a part of the problem themselves. I've confessed I've been a part of the problem with my very, little capability. We've all been a part of the problem. But the senior journalists who continue to call themselves journalists need to be a part of the solution now. That is all I'm saying.
But we've seen things going from bad to worse. And in the short term, I don't see much hope. But in the long term, 10, 20, 30 years from now, what kind of dynamics do you think will shape the Pakistani media?
I think we should all start, when I mean this sincerely, we should all start taking Chinese lessons, because that is what is going to happen. For example, I mentioned Ma Jian, the Chinese author. If you go to China, if you talk to someone about him, he's a world-renowned author. Nobody's heard of him because of censorship. So again, when we say that there are concerns of a Chinese takeover, of course, it's a combined takeover. So it is going to be more restrictive. More, again, one doesn't want to be pessimistic, and there have been causes to be optimistic about certain issues. But as far as press freedom is concerned, it's again, that's, I think the only options we have is, again, some alternative publications internationally give you space to write about Pakistan, which nobody cares about. They don't mean anything. You can have the most hard-hitting piece published anywhere in the world. It wouldn't mean anything unless it's published in Pakistan, let alone going on air. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope our skepticism is proven wrong, but we don't see any reason for that. And just to draw a parallel with India, for example, media in India and Pakistan, we're both hysterical. If anything, the Indian media, especially television media, is more hysterical than anything that Pakistani media can ever be. Pakistan, for example, does not have an equivalent of Republic TV. Perhaps
maybe Bowl News,
maybe Bowl, but Bowl does not have the same audience, and it definitely does not have an Arnab Goswami. There is no equivalent of an Arnab Goswami.
Maybe Amir Liaquat. You can drop that.
Amir Liaquat he wears so many hats, and he's so many things at so many different times. A dedicated journalist, hyper nationalist journalist who enjoys such level of. But the problem is, Pakistan does not have an Arnab Goswami. But Pakistan does not have a Gauri Lankesh either. Pakistan does not have a journalist who had the guts, in the midst of a Hindutva regime, had the guts to criticize Hinduism, to criticize the discrimination that is rooted in the religious ideology. Can you imagine something like that happening in Pakistan? Forget the religious ideology. Our journalists can't even criticize the Taliban. Our journalists can't even, condemn the Islamist groups. Okay, I know we're getting carried away. Our prime minister called Osama bin Laden a martyr of Islam. And there was no backlash.
Let's talk specifically about this point. When Prime Minister Imran Khan, in the floor of the National Assembly of Pakistan, calls the biggest terrorist of the world a martyr, what implications in the long term do you think it will have for Pakistan? And doesn't it set a narrative of the security state we were talking about previously?
Exactly. That is that is what I'm trying to say. Honestly, how does one explain? It's not just it not just unravels the Pakistani ideology. It doesn't just unravel the state duplicity on terrorism. Nothing to do with terrorism. Nothing to do with Taliban. Pakistan has no links to the Taliban, but then Pakistan is also facilitating talks with the Taliban. How does that happen? We, for the past decade, we have been denying that we had any idea that Osama bin Laden was in Abbottabad. And we considered him a terrorist. Musharraf would go, he still goes on tours and tells everyone that, we had no idea that he was there. If we are we were against Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda and everything that he represented, then why is Imran Khan hailing him as a martyr? And more critically, Imran Khan has said all kinds of ridiculous things. Why isn't there more uproar? Why wasn't this a front page story? Why wasn't there more hue and cry over this? That is the issue. That's what I'm talking about. You might not have the hyper nationalists, because all countries have their hyper media outlets. But the journalists who are willing to risk their lives, okay, we are journalists who would be, unfortunately, and it sounds insensitive, but we have been giving up our lives for so much less. We haven't even come close to addressing what needs to be addressed. And that's
no, but Mr. Shahid, I've seen your reporting, your columns, your analysis, and for what it's worth, I think you are addressing the right issues very bravely, very boldly. You've addressed the blasphemy law. You've addressed the state of minorities, forced conversions. So I think there is some hope. But have you ever faced any pressure because of your reporting on these sensitive subjects?
Again, that's what I said. It's maybe a few years ago, I myself and a lot of other writers as well. You're talking about these issues in Pakistani media. That's when it meant have the opportunity, which I'm grateful for, to write on these subjects. But if you're writing for international outlets, it does not resonate as much. It's easier because the official narrative in Pakistan is that everything is a conspiracy. That by the way, is a narrative that is rooted in, again, that's how the whole idea of it being a security state from the onset. So yes, again, when I say you are only targeted if you are actually making a difference, if you are considered a threat, if no, if you are just publishing certain viewpoints or reports, even it's not that it's not that big a problem. Unless, of course, I do get some I have occasionally received certain calls, but more than myself, when I was working with the Pakistani media, my editors would receive calls about me, that why is this happening, why is that happening. More recently, Israeli newspaper Haaretz is something that is. I remember last year a piece on Pakistan considering floating the idea of forming relations with Israel. And a lot of that was based on discussions with diplomats, and which has now come out in the open that there was frustration within the Pakistani diplomatic circles regarding regarding Saudi Arabia's and the Gulf states, a complete rejection of the Pakistani narrative on Kashmir. There was that frustration. And then that's why they peddled this idea of, let's see, because again, Kamran Khan, who's completely following the official state narrative now, he was the first one who posed the question, why can't he form relations with Israel? So I wrote a piece on that for Haaretz, and that piece was completely blown up. It was discussed on national TV as well, and it was discussed in a press conference with the DG ISPR as well, that this is what is being published in the Israeli newspaper, and he just said it's a part of the fifth generation warfare. And and for example, Zaid Hamid Saab has been especially kind on me. He always, whenever I write something for Haaretz, he always tweets it out that this is what this Mossad agent, Israeli agent is writing. So that's it. I've been fortunate enough to not face challenges that a lot of our journalists have faced on ground. So I'm not going to pretend that that anything even remotely close to that has happened. But of course, there are certain risks for anyone. But you should be. I mean, if you can't even do this, I mean that is what if you can't. This is the bare minimum that you can do. Just this is, if you can't even do this, then when I say our media outlets become PR agencies, what I mean is that you can make all that money, probably even more money, doing actual marketing. Why not go there? Why pretend to be journalists and do PR for the powers that be? Just defeating the whole purpose of journalism.
And you mentioned a fifth generation war, and this is something we hear all the time from defense analysts and people who are affiliated with the military establishment. So could you tell us what they mean when they say a fifth generation war is being fought in Pakistan at the moment?
Some of the people who use the term fifth generation warfare are actually trying to say that there is a war of information. That information is the new armor or new arsenal for global warfare. That a lot of people are saying this. The data is the biggest asset today. But I think of the number of people that use the term fifth generation warfare, probably 1% of those people would actually mean this. Everyone else just uses the buzzword fifth generation warfare to just as it's just to create some form of hyperbole. It's been a part of Pakistan's policy. For example, for the longest time, we said that the former Soviet Union and the current, now Russia, they have been interested in Pakistan because they wanted access to warm waters. Now, nobody actually knew what access to warm water was supposed to mean. We talk about the geopolitical location of Pakistan as being, but nobody actually, these are just buzzwords that you throw. You don't dissect them. So fifth generation warfare actually is about information or data warfare, but in Pakistan it is used as a takedown of people you want to silence as raw agents or Israeli agents. That is what it means.
Okay, so let's talk about something lighter since we've talked about such a heavy. So I read your work all the time, and I must say that you write very, very eloquently. So do you have any tips for people who aspire to write as well as you?
I think you're being extremely kind. You know, anyone who asks me for any tips, I just tell them not to follow my example in anything. I think my whole career path was completely wrong. I think I personally represent one of the many things that is wrong with Pakistani journalism, and that is the fact that a person who wasn't qualified to be a journalist became a journalist, and then continued being a journalist. Of course, I was willing to learn. I think this is one thing that you need to be willing to learn. You need to be open to criticism. I see a lot of younger writers not being able to take criticism well. I mean, you publish a few articles and you think that I don't know how to frame it in a politer way, but you think you know everything. That Be open to criticism. Continue to write as much as you can. And I think personally, again, I'm not saying that again, everyone should have their own plan of action that they should follow, but it's important that, and this is up to each individual, it's important that you write about issues, that you cover issues, that you speak up about issues that you think are important, not because of issues that are going to be a part of certain narratives, or not because this is what needs to be said. Always be open to be proven wrong. All the time. You can be and you will be. If there is a time in your life when you haven't, your opinions haven't evolved, and evolution does not mean that your core principle changes. It simply means that you now have more facts to either substantiate your arguments and your beliefs, or that you now have data or evidence to move a different way. Be flexible, be open to learning, and be open to alternative. The most important thing, I wish we had more time to discuss this, something that I hold in higher esteem than anything else in the world: freedom of speech. We don't know what freedom of speech means. Again, we probably need a whole new video for this. But freedom of speech is such an important part of being a journalist. You can't say that there should be freedom of speech, but there shouldn't be any freedom to offend. Freedom of speech means the freedom to offend. Freedom of speech is the freedom of the dissenting voices. Because if you're going to peddle the accepted narratives, you don't need any freedom to do that. No? That's what I'm talking about. Freedom is needed for the ideologies, for the viewpoints that are condemned in society. So the idea of freedom to offend, I don't think there are many people, even who talk about freedom of speech, understand the importance of freedom of dissent. That's something that everyone should take up. Be open to alternative viewpoints, whatever your viewpoints might be.
Okay, Mr. Shahid, last question. And I want to ask you, is there any message you want to send to those people, and there are a lot of them, perhaps the majority, who believe that journalists like ourselves, who do not toe the national security narrative, are the enemies of Pakistan and don't have the best interests of Pakistan in their heart?
Oh, I think, and by the way, this is a problem that I've personally, I don't know about you, and I don't know about other people. There's something for example, if there is someone with an Islamist viewpoint, if you criticize Islamist ideologies, obviously they're going to be upset and they're going to criticize you. Similarly, if someone is a hyper nationalist and you talk about the military or the security or Pakistan's security policy, they might attack you. The biggest bone that I have is with people who often identify as moderates or progressives or liberals, because I mean, so many people. I can understand, Zaid Hamid being upset, or an Oriya Maqbool Jan being upset. Oriya Maqbool Jan, by the way, had again whole new story, but he once ran one of my articles with my picture and a few other writers as well, saying that these are. It was an Urdu article. These are atheists in Pakistan, spreading anti-Islam propaganda. Can you imagine that? In a country where you have blasphemy law and you can be killed for that. That's what Oriya Maqbool Jan did. So if people like those can be upset. My issue is with so many of these moderate and progressive-minded people, they would ask you, "Oh, don't you have anything nice to say about Pakistan? Why don't you paint a positive image of Pakistan for a change?" It is not my bloody job. It's not my job to paint, or not. When I say my job, it is not a journalist's job to paint a positive image of the country. A journalist's job is to highlight what is wrong with the country, even if there is 99% that is right, which is obviously there is no utopian world. Everywhere there is a lot of things that are wrong that need to be criticized. Even if there are fewer things that are wrong, you need to highlight those. Of course, you have to set your record straight. You know, when, for example, you want to condemn the atrocities that other states are committing, you have to set your record straight. But that can't. You don't want to be the one who, just so you don't sound biased, you have to create false equivalence between different states and different ideologies. We have to accept the fact, this is a fact, not an opinion, that Pakistan is significantly more messed up in terms of extremism, in terms of intolerance, in terms of structural problems than India. India is only even beginning to do what we've been doing for decades. Now, if you say this, you are an apologist for the Modi regime. No, you're bloody not. You are stating facts. So my issue is, a journalist's job is to criticize what is wrong. We may be wrong. We might have, certain opinions occasionally or even frequently might be misplaced. But that is our job. And that is what needs to be understood. That is what needs to be appreciated. When we are wrong, when you disagree with us, tell us that you disagree with us. Don't tell us that you're working on an agenda or you're working for a foreign power. Don't tell us that. If we are stating certain facts, prove that our facts are wrong. We might be wrong. We are humans. We could be wrong. Our opinions could be misplaced. Have a discussion. Have a debate. Please do not silence any voices. The only voices, again, going back to freedom of speech, the only voices that should be silenced are the ones that perpetuate violence. Anyone who's talking about anything else, could be the most repulsive idea, could be the most offensive idea, as long as it's an idea, please don't silence them. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Shahid, for your time. And
Thank you for inviting me. I wanted this to be more cohesive, but I think it went all over the place.
No, but
I hope
really important issues, and I hope to have you again sometime, maybe next week.
Whenever. I would also, by the way, big fan of your work and of your investigative journalism, of your podcast, and especially big fan of the Paji podcast. So if we could do a Paji podcast together. But my disclaimer, Punjabi is not my mother tongue. I will make a lot of mistakes, but I want to do that.
Punjabi actually कर देने फिर एक पंजाबी साडी जुबान है ते सानू करनी चाहिदी है.
मैं जी आधी जिंदगी लाहौर च रहा ते फिर मैं पंजाबी मेरी जुबान तो नहीं हैगी पर जेड़ा बंदा 16 साल लाहौर च गुजार लेते हो ते फिर वो पंजाबी तो हो गया ना.
बट डन हो गया. अगली साडी पॉडकास्ट पाजी पॉडकास्ट ਅਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕਰਨੀ है.
इकट्ठे करनी तो फिर इकट्ठे चुके जाना है.
अल्लाह मालिक है जी, इंशाल्लाह थिंग्स विल.
Chalo. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope I was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.